And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to hour number 2 of the fastest 2 hours in talk radio and the most easily distracted New Zealand talk radio show host in fucking history. It's the Vinny Eastwood Show on AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the proudly unprofessional broadcast that is regular and awesome and always fun. And the reason why it's unprofessional is because I disagree with the concept of professionalism for a number of reasons, but the main one is the world is currently run by professionals. How's that fucking working out for you? My very special guest is Russell Malcolm, also from New Zealand. Russell, welcome to the program.
G'day, Vinny. And I just have to say to you, bud, there is a man who's done nothing wrong. He's done nothing wrong at all. But in all his life, he's done nothing at all. But what's important when we get something wrong is that we learn by it, mate.
Well,
that's the important part.
I'm lucky. Sometimes I don't have to wait to learn the lesson. Sometimes I know I'm being an idiot right at that moment.
Yeah, well, it's pretty easy to get snowed under when you're overtired and that. And Eve's a fantastic person. She's a really hard worker. She's a dedicated person. She's highly intelligent. She's motivated by all the right things. So hopefully you can get her back and hear some of that.
We shall see. Those pesky mute buttons, eh? Sometimes you're reaching for something and it's just, man, all over the place today. So
we've got to be pretty conscious of what's going on around us, eh? And there's a lesson there. When you lose focus on that, things fall apart pretty quick.
Now, strangely enough, part of the reason why I wanted to get you on the show today is actually to talk about this kind of thing that happens to people in our movement, you know, little fights between activists and egos and things along those lines. And there's little stouches and fights that come up because you've got two traumatized people that are going up against each other, right?
I didn't see... I had a quick look at that thread that you'd discussed, and what I saw, basically, I wouldn't have given it any time. It's a troll. That's all there is to it. It's someone who's putting nothing into society themselves. They're a troll. They're having a shot at you, and I would have walked away on that. You know, look at what they've achieved. They've done nothing. They're just taking a cheap shot. Walk away. That's all there is to it. Mm-hmm. If anyone thinks that someone stands up for the greater good to see what money they can make out of it, well, it only reflects upon themselves. It doesn't reflect upon the people they're taking a shot at.
Well, also there was one of the things that I wanted to elucidate as well, is that exact point you just made. I met one of these other guys the other day, you know, knew him like 9 years ago or whatever. He was a co-host of mine for a bit. And I asked him, so what are you up to? And he goes, oh, yeah, I've got a couple of projects on the go. You mean you've done and accomplished nothing in 9 years, and I'm supposed to be taking advice from you about how to run my operation? Okay.
Okay. Well, let's lift this show, shall we?
Let's change the subject.
Positive.
Yeah, let's get into something positive. Now, there was a murder in Christchurch for somebody. Oh, god damn, I'm bad.
Okay, is that positive for meaty?
It's a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. It's positive that it's actually going to get...
Are you referring to the current trial that's on in Christchurch, New Zealand? Is that the one you're referring about?
I believe that you're the one who's more familiar on this instance than I am. I'm simply recalling an earlier conversation that we had and attempting to get it up again.
Okay, well, assuming we're on an international audience here, I'll have to go into the background a little bit. In New Zealand, we've got a social welfare organisation which is called WINS. It covers a lot of people, i.e. pensioners, the old aged, the sick, those who can't get jobs, etc. And I guess it's an international issue, but there is an imbalance that comes through when people are dealing with organisations like that. Organisations set up by government or controlled by corporations. Now, in September last year, in Christchurch, New Zealand, which is the same city that had a number of major earthquakes, and it's the same city that's got a huge number of traumatised people for various reasons, including the earthquakes, including the bureaucracy that they've been put through after the earthquakes. It's got a high suicide rate. It's got a high, and I'm going to use the word mental injury rate. I deliberately did not use the term mental illness, as mental illness has got a connotation to it. Too often that puts the blame upon the person who is suffering the injury. Now, mental injury is something which is caused by external influences, mistreatment, trauma, violence, psychological violence, emotional violence, whatever. But it's certainly something which is common via dealing with bureaucracy, misuse of legal power, an imbalance of power, things like that. And in this case in Christchurch, a balaclava-clad man walked into a Winds office with a shotgun, opened fire, killed a couple of people. One apparently he intended to take out. He was arrested soon afterwards. There were other people injured. It's been subject to government review in New Zealand, which means absolutely nothing. It means there'll be a whitewash and they won't get at what's really underlying it and won't seek to get to the issues that really need to be addressed. Now, the man's been in custody. We've heard absolutely nothing from him, which is not unusual, and there'll be plenty of people saying, why isn't he just executed straight away? And yeah, I can understand that argument. But we also have to look at why we're losing so many people to suicide, why we've got so many people mentally injured, and we have to listen to what they have to say. Now, that man has been put up on trial in the High Court in New Zealand, and I think the most basic thing in any justice system is that the accused has a right to be heard. The accused has a right for legal representation. And in this case in Christchurch, New Zealand, the man is not present in the courtroom. The prosecution have said the only thing to be decided is whether the man pulled the trigger or not. It's an identity issue. Did he do it or not? The prosecution have said that to a jury. And in doing that, what concerns me is that it's juries who are actually charged with deciding what's right and wrong in a society, and they should be presented with everything, including what he has to say or someone on his behalf who's taking instruction from him has to say. What's behind this? Because unless you want more of it, you have to at least listen. Now, a judge has ordered the man's not allowed to be in court. He was briefly allowed in court. The man stood up and said, I haven't seen a doctor for 6 months. Now, the man is terminally ill. That's what he apparently was on the welfare for in the first place. He's been a worker all his life, I understand. He came back to New Zealand when he was diagnosed with a terminal illness. He went to Winds seeking help. He was living rough in the bushes. He either couldn't get a house or they didn't get a house that was satisfactory for him, whatever. But you're certainly talking about someone who was in a stressed state. And it is wrong that anyone is in court without legal representation, especially when there is mental trauma. It doesn't do society any good. It doesn't do the justice system any good. It is not justice. It can't be seen to be done when a judge says, well, we're not going to have him in here. The man stood up in court. He says, I haven't seen a doctor in 6 months. I need help. I'm on a hunger strike. He's wheeled in a wheelchair. The judge says, oh, that's an outburst, and kicks him out within 2 minutes. Well, the jury has a right and a duty to hear what the man's got to say regardless. And for that to be denied is wrong. And I'm disappointed that an organisation of lawyers such as New Zealand Law Society haven't jumped up and down and says, hang on, this is wrong. We've got to hear at least what he's got to say. The jury have to hear what he's got to say. The public have to hear what he's got to say. Let's try and find out what's behind this. Now, it could well be that this man just stuffed up their plans and didn't go and commit suicide like the rest of the people do. I don't know. But that's one possibility. And it's simply wrong that the accused is not allowed in court and has not got legal representation who will say what he wants to be said on his behalf. That's probably what I've got to say on that, Vinny. But it's not untypical of the injustice that is throughout New Zealand at the moment. Like Vince Seymour's been battling away on people's behalves for a long, long time. He's paid a huge price for it. He's never done it with the intention of making money. He's always done it for for what is good, what is right, what is better for everyone. I'm sure you've talked with him and interviewed him, but we simply do not have a justice system that works in New Zealand, and we have a media which are prepared to let these things go. Now, that one concerns me. Now, I won't take over your show.
Well, the thing is, it's just, I feel really bad, you know. I'm just not having a really good day, you know. Sometimes
that happens. That happens.
At least I haven't been arrested. At least I haven't been arrested, denied a lawyer, and demonised in the media, and being traumatised for years on end by insurance payments not coming in, and WINS payments being late, and having to reapply for shit all the time, and having to live in a fucking caravan, or having a giant puddle open up on my driveway, locking me in my house every time there's a tiny little slip like the poor people in fucking Christchurch.
You are referring to the people of Christchurch. So was it 15,000 earthquakes they've had in 5 years? And the first earthquake that occurred down there, which was September, I think 2010, was a major earthquake. It happened on the early hours of a weekend morning. The city was empty. And because people weren't at work, there were no fatalities. And people were very lucky, but no one had any idea that the aftershocks would be so severe and carry on. I think on day one, a lot of people thought, oh, this is okay. We're going to get a new house. We're going to get the house renovated, blah, blah, blah. And 4 or 5 years later, they had to learn that that's not to be. And they've certainly been stuffed around by the insurance companies, by an agency set up by government. Government handed the reconstruction work to a corporation that everything had to be fed through them. And without any doubt, they have caused a hell of a lot of injuries. And I would suggest that even though there was nearly 200 people killed in one of the severe earthquakes that come afterwards, I would say that the bureaucracy around it has actually done more damage to people than the sheikhs themselves. Being stuffed around by bureaucracy, being out of control, having things taken from your control, having your intelligence insulted, does a lot of damage.
Well, you know firsthand, and so do I. And this is another thing about what happens to people, and indeed the reason why people actually become activists, because they get damaged in such a way that there's certain things that they avoid now that they can't do anymore, and they actually have to reorganize their life around a different goalpost, so to speak, just in order to be able to keep surviving.
There's a lot of truth in that. If you start looking at the stress issue, that's a huge subject in its own right, which I understand Eve has done a lot of research on. Probably what I learnt the most from, the simplest thing I learnt the most from with stress, is when I heard about shell shock. So we're going back to the First World War. And to think that people would rather take a bullet than to face the circumstances they've had to been through again. That's not cowardice. It's actually the brain has shut down and won't allow that person to go near it again. But the same symptoms exist. They're now called post-traumatic stress disorder, but there's multiple various ways they can come in. They've got very similar systems to burnout. Legal abuse syndrome, which is hardly recognised, it's certainly not spoken about, would be one of the worst. And perhaps the worst thing about it is that it's a sabotaging that's taken place. The legal abuse is the use of authority and power from the very people you think represent justice, etc., the they who are going to fix things. It's abuse and it's sabotaging from them, which is used to take out people for various reasons. And probably one of the worst things about it, which has been identified, is that the intended targets or victims never believed somebody else would be so cruel and would do that. Nobody else would actually set out to kill them while they're holding a position of authority and look so respectable in society. However, it's common. Just to look at what's happened in New Zealand, and there have been many people have been on the receiving end of this. In New Zealand, we've got a fairly wet climate, in the early 90s, we started building houses differently to how we traditionally built them. And this is all government-approved changes and corporation-induced changes. And we ended up with 80,000 houses that leaked. And they had severe health issues because they leaked, and they were falling down. Well, the occupants had severe health issues. But 80,000 houses equates to a lot of people. Now, government didn't help those people. They said we're setting up various organisations to help them. The blame rested with government, it rested with corporations, and it rested with council. But nobody could ever get any redress unless they went through the court system. And the whole idea of a court system is you see how many you can knock out who can't survive the process. Now, if I went down the road with a baseball bat and started bashing people with a baseball bat and causing physical injury, everyone knows I deserve to be shot for it. But here you have the pillars of society, these lawyers, these barristers, these councillors, our elected representatives, the court system, our MPs, our government, and then the corporations who caused it, all playing the game of attrition. And let's see if we can destroy people so they can't survive the process for justice. Now, 80,000 houses is a lot of people. There's more than one person to a house affected. There's been a huge number of suicides, but our suicide numbers were kept secret.
Really?
But, yeah, suicide numbers and our Coroner's Act has actually prohibited in publishing any details for such a long time. It's only now that that's starting to lift. And, oh, hello, there was 570 people committed suicide out of 4 million. Oh, we've got a problem.
That's a huge spike. That's like 10, 20 times the national average or something, isn't it?
It's a big spike. It's, that just represents human misery. There's lots of reasons that people may want to take or decide to take their own lives, but one of them is that life becomes so miserable and things become so overwhelming. And people who are under stress eventually lose the right chemical balance in their body. The body simply isn't able to think clearly. The mind doesn't work. It's not an illness. It's a deliberately inflicted injury. It's the same as what police do when they decide they'll just throw a judicial head kick or be used for a judicial head kick on someone and lay charges knowing the charges are false, but it will destroy that person and that a person's ability to function while they have to go through the process and try and prove their innocence.
Whoa. So let's say I was an insurance company and I insured 80,000 homes or something like that in a big place, gets hit by an earthquake. Is it in my financial best interest to drag my feet until such a time as the people that are trying to get their money back out of me, which they are owed, die from the stress me not giving them their money caused?
They die or they give up. As for the financial interest, I'm not too sure what the cost would be of defending in the courts, paying for lawyers at least to defend it, versus the settling straight away. But if we were to look, say, at the Christchurch earthquake, that was a massive quake and possibly the largest amount of damage in a city area. And when I say that, it's not the largest quake overall in the world, but in an insured first-class city where everybody had insurance, or 99% had insurance. That was what caused a problem for the insurance companies. I strongly suspect they did not have the money there in the first place to do the settlements. Right? So what do? You have to stall it.
No. There's a scene from Fight Club. He says that they've got a whole bunch of cars that are rolling out, but they've got defects. Now, what you do is you have to apply the formula. What is the amount of possible money for out-of-court settlement, rationalised by the amount of people that would probably have a crash? And then if you run the formula, if running a recall costs more than just the average out-of-court settlements based upon the amount of accidents, then you don't do a recall. You just let people die because it's more profitable.
Well, corporations are for profit, and corporations don't give a damn about human life. And that's one of the things which is very difficult to wake up to and accept as a fact that's just implemented daily. But
Especially as a
certainly
former businessman for you,
back
it might.
to the subject on. Sorry?
Especially as a former businessman for you, that might have come as quite a bit of a shock.
Oh, I think a lot of people just, when you wake up to it, I don't know what percentage of the population would actually be aware of it, but it's right in our faces. If we look internationally, there's a chap, Barry Trowler, who's got clips on YouTube from the UK. He's ex-special services, ex-military. His specialty is in microwave technology, which actually means cell phones now. But he talked of a decision having been made in the UK that for a $2 billion profit, I think it was $2 billion, it might cost 1.5 million lives. And they went for the profit. And if anyone who thinks that corporations won't go for profit over human lives, just look at the arms industry.
And look at what was it? The 4 permanent members of the Security Council on the United Nations: Britain, France, Russia, China, and the United States. It's actually the 5 permanent members, right? Guess who the top 5 arms manufacturers are?
Yeah, I can't laugh at that one.
You can't make this stuff up.
No, I can't laugh at it. When you just start to think, and I just couldn't even start to think on the misery that these people are putting out to people around the world. It doesn't matter who they are, whether they're a child, a baby to be born in 10 years' time, a grandmother, a male who's 40 years old, a male who's 20 years old. There is no excuse for causing such misery across the planet. It's not something I could ever laugh about.
I think that's the reason why they created a military-industrial complex, because certain people make the money and other people make the wars happen. The media, etc., and the governments that are in their back pockets.
Well, we've got to wake enough people up to point out what's going on. We've got to point out what's going on locally. And we've got to start waking people up that it is affecting them. It's all very well to say it's on the other side of the world, it doesn't affect us, but people need to wake up to what's going on right under their own noses. New Zealand has got so much happening right under our noses. It's directly affecting us. It's going to directly affect us a lot more. If they don't give us stuff because it's happening to someone else, well, maybe they've got to wake up that they too can be affected by it. What's gone on with the handover of, when I say the word public, just saying what ratepayers own or taxpayers own, or Joe Bloggs, the private individual, and how that's being assets stripped away by the bankers, by the agents for the bankers. Auckland Super City is one that you and I have discussed in the past. The Auckland Super City, Auckland area is very wide geographically. It was formerly made up of several independent councils, and I'm sure this is going on around the world, so it's not something that's a local issue. And about 6 years ago, our government out of the blue said, we're going to save you all money by amalgamating all the councils into one big super city, and it's going to save you so much money. We've done the figures and we're the experts, and you can trust us.
It was actually before that. It was a little bit before that, or at least the initial proposals for a super city started back in the Labour government. And you see the left working with the right, and it's just a dog and pony show.
Well, both wings of the same
vulture.
Yeah, well, that's what it is. But now we've seen it come to fruition. We saw the super city started. The CEO was put in place by government, who are just hitmen, prior to any councillors being elected. So the idea of a democratically elected council running the show was never on the cards, even if they were capable. It was always the CEO and the bureaucrats who were going to steer it and follow the agenda. They will put on the table the options that the councillors have got to vote on, but they're still totally controlling what the options were. And we've now got a super city where all the assets were put into corporation structure. So that's the assets from the greater Auckland area. All the councils, the contracts are handed over to the international corporations, and they will be made to be financially viable for those international corporations. The rates have gone up and gone up and gone up instead of going down. And the debt level has now gone to where it is completely unsustainable. And the bankers are laughing, saying, now we're going to hook it all in. So now they're looking at taking the parks of Auckland. They'll be taking the corporations. It's all very easily done. So the people of Auckland who thought they had all these assets, who thought there was some backing there, have just been absolutely ripped off. But that will not just be in Auckland. It will be happening around the world. People did stand up about it in Auckland, and once again there were those who were prepared to shoot them down. Psychopaths get away with a lot if people will shoot down anyone who dares question. And of course the term conspiracy theorist and things like that are used in a derogatory way to make it sound that anyone who's raising argument is unbalanced. And yet, in hindsight, those who raised the argument, pointed it out, have unfortunately, and will unfortunately, be proven to be correct.
You know, it reminds me of the scene.
So we're back on that agenda.
It reminds me of the scene in 2012 when the world's ending, and the Secretary of State turns to his media guy and says, "You know, it's quite funny that the crazy guys with the cardboard signs were right all along." Because this is the thing that's going on here right now, and I apologise for my jovial manner, because I know you take this very seriously, because you've actually suffered quite personally because of such psychopaths. Probably, I'd say, out of all the activists that I know, you probably lost the most out of all the ones, and that's actually why I initially tried to help you and spend as many days as I did editing that
It's
that
been a
full
great help,
confession.
Vinny, and thank you, Vinny. It's been a great help, and I still use those, and will be adding to them more as we are now managing to build up a much stronger case. And with those cases, we will not be going to our court system. We will be taking it directly to the homes with the evidence, outside the homes of those people responsible, outside the police stations with our loudhailers and the evidence, presenting the cases and demanding that those police officers hand in their uniforms. We will do it by people's trials. We won't play their corrupt game. And then we will take a look at the ASB Bank, which is owned by the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. And we will expose to the bank's customers what they've been up to and the evil that that bank has been participating in. And we'll see what the bank's customers think of the tactics that the bank got up to. And I will certainly be pushing that the bank's license should be removed from New Zealand, because why would you issue a banker's license to people who carry out armed robberies? So
if you wanted to do
these things are
business
not
with
without
them,
consequence. Sorry, Bill. Sorry, Vinny.
if you wanted to get into an organised crime racket with them, I guess that's what I'd do if I was a criminal scumbag.
Well, look what they're doing to the world, mate. We do not have these problems in the world by accident. There are people behind it. Those people have names, they have addresses, they have homes. And our mistake is going and playing the system through the court system, where they screw you with several $100,000 and destroy your health before you even get before the judge that they own.
It's a gauntlet that they make you run through with no goal at the end.
It destroys people. It's anyone who's been through it. If you talk to those who've survived, it takes a long time to get them to open up and to trust you to open up, and then to start going through the various layers of trauma. But trauma is what it is. Now, as a society, we look at people who abuse children and, oh, these are terrible people, and most people want to see them executed. Yet, what's different when that trauma is lashed upon other people in the community as part of a daily business activity? It's not done for fair profit. It's not done to protect their interests. Right? So we've got to look at, let's use an example. We've just had a suspected homicide here in the middle of the city. Someone's body is fallen out of a car as it's driving down the road, and we've got half of South Auckland, which is a big area, blocked off, and hundreds of cops will be working on it, and the media are making huge headlines about it. And that's one potential death, which is disgusting. However, how many deaths are we having daily due to the banks, the councils, the insurance companies, and the police misusing their powers? Now, if we can put all that resource into one investigation, why is it that we can pretend that these other things aren't going on?
Well, we need to adopt, I think, what Ev told me is that the key to being a successful and a good journalist is a healthy sense of jaded cynicism. So that when people ask the questions, why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? Basically, what you have to do is assume the worst. And you'll find, unfortunately, that 90% of the time that you're correct. The 10% of the time that you're wrong, it's because the truth is usually worse than you could possibly imagine.
Well, Nicky Hager is a New Zealand journalist, and he's a household name in New Zealand. Prior to the last election, he got hold of some emails that were used by a prolific blogger in New Zealand who, even though he may have a lot of listeners and some pretty heavy money sponsors, that would not be something I would be proud of. But it turned out that someone managed to hack his computer and come up with quite a few years of emails coming from ministers of government and text messages to him. And then we look at his sponsors and we see there's some big money coming there. Current ministers were involved, as you know. Now, the journalist released these emails. All he's done is released what was given to him after censoring the more private comments out of it. And he has withheld some other information. Now, Nicky Hager prints this book. The New Zealand controlled media immediately tell people not to worry about it. This is right at election time, so the sheep will, okay, this is what we're meant to think we think, so let's just think that we think that, and we've got no responsibility ourselves. Anyone who's been victim of crime in New Zealand knows that it's almost impossible to get police attention to it. However, Nicky Hager is raided by the police. Now, first of all, this is a journalist, and allegedly the judge who issued that search warrant didn't know he was a journalist. The alleged complainant, which is a chap called Cameron Slater, is it not? Not Cameron Slater.
What do you mean, Cameron Slater? Whale oil's
Whale
Cameron
oil.
Slater?
Yeah.
That is Cameron Slater.
Cameron Slater. He was contacted by Police National Headquarters to go and sign a complaint that they had ready for him, so he hadn't even complained. Right, so this has got exactly the same implications as the Pinchgate affair. Someone in the senior government tells National Headquarters, get this thing actioned. They have to then invent a complainant, and a journalist is raided. Now, why would they raid the journalist? There can't be any charges coming from it. Or did they want to find out what he was withholding?
Or did they want to send a chilling effect to all the journalists in the country that if you expose what we're doing at these levels, you're not safe and you can't hide behind the fact that you're a journalist. You can't hide behind the fact.
They've certainly done that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've certainly done that. There was another chap in New Zealand who's very popular. We don't have a lot of radio, TV channels in New Zealand, but another chap who's been on the air for quite some time, had a good public following, John Campbell. And we brought back in from in Australia a Kiwi chap that I thought we'd deported. He certainly left the country in shame. And I think he left Australia in shame. He comes back here and is gifted with this huge advertising campaign to put him on TV as some kind of icon. And they take this popular chap off. Now, the thing with this popular chap is that he'd done a number of investigative shows on the Prime Minister. So John Campbell gets removed, has his show removed. Now, that's what happens to journalism in New Zealand.
It's actually...
There was another case.
May I also elaborate on that? The former CEO of MediaWorks, who are the company that broadcasted John Campbell, was run by Stephen Joyce, who became the government communications minister, who then broke into a $40 million bailout for MediaWorks because of unpaid broadcasting licensing fees. Their new CEO is in fact a personal friend of John Key, the Prime Minister, named Mark Weldon. Mark Weldon gets appointed the CEO of MediaWorks, and soon after, the journalist on MediaWorks is probably really drawing a lot of attention for doing anti-John Key stories as they perceive it. Suddenly, despite epic ratings after the talk of him being taken off air, gets taken off air anyway because of low ratings.
Yeah, Campbell had the ability, if he'd stood up and told New Zealanders, and I've got to say to you, I don't watch mainstream at all, and I was no real fan of Campbell.
Me neither. I stuck up for him just 'cause.
Yep, but he had the ability to say to the people of New Zealand, hey, this is unfair, and this is what you think, and we've got to do something about this. And he is probably the sort of guy who would have done that. When he saw that the stench was so great and something had to be done, he probably had it in him to actually do that, and he may yet. So yeah, he was a risk to government, but it's not peculiar. It's not peculiar to New Zealand. You know, around the world, it's the same agenda running. Australia's the same. We're all getting controlled from the same places.
Also,
none of our governments come up with a policy that the people asked for. All our policies, our rules, etc., are offshore originated, like as with the TPPA and the anti-food bill and the anti-food growing bill and the anti-natural medicines bill. None of that's come from the people of those countries that it's being implemented over. That's all agenda that's come from offshore. You think about the logic of it. Nature, God, whatever, gave us some natural things which have worked as medicines, as health products to sustain life for tens of thousands of years, perhaps. And our corporations, a relatively new invention in the human story, can have all these things banned by making donations to our politicians who are supposed to work for us. Now, there's several levels of stupidity, but for us to tolerate that, we've got every level plus a few more.
I found that we as people, we're of a moral conscience, and we like to think that people have a moral conscience just like us, and we dismiss such things as stupidity, when in actual fact, it's evil, it's deliberate, and sometimes we have to remind ourselves of that fact that there is really a lot of good things in this world, and they're worth fighting for, but that doesn't change the fact that there is true evil that is trying to destroy it.
We are so gifted in New Zealand. We've got the very best country in the world. But it's I guess it's the human mind inventing crap that's stuffing it. We've got is it Helen Kelly, who's been a union representative for a long time. And I was never a union person, but here she is. She's now got terminally ill with lung cancer. She's in a lot of pain. She had to go to the Minister of Health to ask if she could have, was it cannabis oil? Now, I don't use drugs. I don't touch cannabis. But why the hell does she have to go and ask somebody else if she can take something that nature provided? That is ridiculous that anyone should have to ask. And it's even worse that someone should have to grovel when they're dying in pain.
Excuse me, can I please take something so that I don't die, that is non-toxic and that I can grow myself and not even have to really tell anybody about or process in any way, shape or form? No, you can't. It's dangerous.
Well, it should make us really think, we've really got to think about all these things that we allow to go on. And we've got to really think about the whole lot. We've turned a blind eye for so long. We've been railroaded for so long. We've got to turn it round. We've got a beautiful country. We've got a fantastic place here in New Zealand. We can produce food. We can do whatever we want in New Zealand. We can produce, accepting that we're allowing corporations to tax it or to ban it or to control it.
Now, this recalls a conversation I was having today about the topic of cannabis, and I was just thinking about this. Let's say theoretically that there's a number of people in New Zealand that are currently suffering and or dying, and a number of people that suffer and die daily because they don't have access to cannabis as a medicine, theoretically. Now, there's a person in the New Zealand Parliament called Peter Dunn, and for the last decade-ish, maybe even plus, his only thing that he's really done for New Zealand is bind every successive government that he's been a part of to never change the laws about cannabis. And I'm just wondering, should such a person, I mean, in light of the evidence that's been there from the beginning, and even more evidence that is coming out by the day, by the truckload, that cannabis saves lives and effectively treats many ailments, should this person be prosecuted for crimes against humanity for all of the deaths and suffering by proxy that he has inflicted upon just the people of New Zealand? That was what I was just thinking to myself, and it's just like, can people be punished in that way? Is punishing somebody like that in such a way, does that corrupt the political process by saying that people have consequences directly for their policies? If it actually hurts and kills people, they should be held responsible for them. Is that wrong? Is that authoritarian?
Aren't you talking here that we need to be looking at common law and how common law developed and what common law is? And when the community decide something is wrong, let's go back to the principle of a jury trial. That is your peers decide if that person is guilty or not guilty. And this even goes back to that murder trial I was talking about in Christchurch. It's up to the jury to be presented with all the evidence, and they can decide what they will take into account. It's not up to a judge to deny them evidence. And the same can be said for anything that we've got going on in a community. If someone is causing harm to another, are they liable? Now, according to the legalese that the bankers have brought in, they've covered themselves pretty well, and if something's not working for them, they just pay donations to the politicians and get something fast-tracked through. But ultimately, it's up to the people to decide, which is getting back to what I was saying about presenting evidence to the people on the street the same way the town crier used to do, pass the message on and let the people decide if the person living in that house has committed crimes and needs to be called to account. So, yes, you go back to a people's court, and yes, if someone's via corporate policy or hiding behind legalese doing harm to another, of course they're accountable. And a community has a duty to look after every one of its members in a fair way.
Well, there's justification for having Peter Dunn strung up, so I like it. After a fair trial by a jury of his peers and evidence submitted and everything, we're not barbarians here, okay? I just want to hear the snap of his neck like a chicken bow when he falls. All right, boom! Oh God,
I'm glad there's no bias in that statement.
Hey, I only try to do things for the... Yeah, hey, look, if you're just doing things for fun, take your children out, see a public execution, some horrific terror. They used to do it back in the day. Take the children out. This is what happens when you're a scumbag and you don't allow people to legalise cannabis, son.
How quickly could you turn a society around if there was a fear of a consequence? If there was actually a possibility of a consequence. At the moment, we certainly don't have any possibility of a consequence. MPs can do as they want. They'll be covered up for. Judges are pretty much the same. The only way you'll get called to account is if you go against call it the old boys network, but I think we know it comes from higher than that. That's the only way you'll get called to account in New Zealand. We had a police officer in northern New Zealand, in Whangarei, very senior police officer who was stealing and dealing drugs. He was involved in prostitution. Another police officer got the evidence on him, presented that evidence, and then the police officer who presented that evidence and had done the work was actually going to be punished for it. Now, somehow along the way, they managed to turn that around and the criminal did get jailed. But that's an unusual circumstance for it to happen. Most of the time, it carries on, it's covered up. It's and this goes back some years. There was an ex-police officer 22 years in the force from the South Island in New Zealand, Tom Lewis, who's now living in the Gold Coast. And he wrote a book exposing the corruption in the New Zealand police, mainly around the South Island. And some of those police officers he mentioned got to the most senior positions now in New Zealand police. In fact, one's even in the Prime Minister's office, running the Prime Minister's office.
May I offer something here? Because was this Paddy about the 100 or so people that he sent to jail because of false testimony? That detective on the drugs?
In that book. I'm not sure if that's in the book, but the book was published in New Zealand. It received a lot of media attention at the time in New Zealand. Tom Lewis was here at the time for its launch. He received a visit from a senior cop while he was at a cafe in Dunedin. He got told, your media won't be covering your book anymore and your book won't be getting republished. And that was the end of that. There was no more media coverage on his book and the publisher resigned. That's New Zealand for you. And it turns out that part of the accusation he had in there, and he had the evidence to back it up, was that a police officer's father had people standing outside a high school soliciting girls, knowing that they were 13 and 14 years old, for sex shows, including with animals. These sex shows were attended by police and MPs. Now, he tried to... A woman whose daughter was solicited on this went to the police and was fobbed off. So she done her own legwork on it, handed the recordings to the police, who tried to fob them off, and just happened that on this particular day, Tom Lewis, who was a sergeant, I believe, at the time, heard what was going on, took over, and started action. However, his investigations were then sabotaged, and the book goes into it in some detail, but they were sabotaged. The information gained from searches disappeared before it got to prosecutions, things like that. But that involves MP, so it's both sides of the house, and that's a long time ago. So once you compromise somewhere through the system, how the hell are you going to get justice out of it? Which is why I say we've got to throw away that system. We know it doesn't work. We're only doing ourselves injury if we expect it to work. And let's say, okay, let's present the evidence in a very fair way. Let's go back to what's fair, present it to the people, and say to the people, what do you think? And when you've got evidence slam dunk against a cop of perjury, perverting the course of justice, political arrests, etc. You'll know of Michelle Kirby, who I'm referring to here. There's another chap in Wangapara, Mark Hobbs, that we can present evidence there of 100% certain political arrests, that we can say, right, let's go up to those stations, let's get outside those stations with loud hailers, with the video cameras, and let's present the evidence out loud, and let's demand that they hand their uniforms in. And there's no reason why that can't be done to bureaucrats. It's fact we need to present. It can't be lynch mobs without listening to evidence. It's got to be done fairly, but we need to establish a justice system that will work. We don't have one that works. We have one that injures people. And unresolved injury, unresolved injustice is an ongoing injury. That's all there is to it.
Hey, wait a second. That reminds me of something, Russell. It's the reason why all the activists do what they do. Because there's some kind of injustice that's been done to them that's unresolved, and they won't actually feel like they're getting over their injury or their pain or their suffering until that shit is fucking solved. Hence the dedication, and hence the fact that they give up everything else in their life that used to be of value to them in order to dedicate themselves to the cause.
That certainly motivates some, and there is plenty of people. Because of the stuff on YouTube, I get a lot of people coming to me with various bits and pieces, and some of it's horrific, and some of it will make brilliant news stories and items one day, and others is very personal, very private for those people, and it takes them a lot to open up and share it. But it is an overwhelming theme of an injustice done to them by someone in authority. And when you listen to these people and you start really picking away objectively to try to get them to understand it, to make sure they're seeing things clearly and they haven't just imagined they've been slighted, some of their stories really are horrific, and they're the ones I'm hearing. Without a doubt, there will be many that these things have happened with who have since suicided or died for other stress-related reasons. So we're not doing this out of malice. We have got something we need to stop. And as I said to you before, if we had someone going down the street with a baseball bat bashing people over, we've got every right to stop them using lethal force if we have to. But we've got something in epidemic proportions far worse than that. We've got the imbalance of power, the misuse of authority, the working for corporations to go for profit over destroying people. We've got that to address.
Now,
and we really don't have an issue as to can we or do we do anything about it. Once you've started, you know it has to be addressed. If someone's going down your road burning the houses down, do you stop them? Oh, they haven't got to my house yet, so I don't need to? Or do you use your brains and say, right, this affects all of us. This is something we all have a responsibility for. You go into Auckland City. It's a place that you used to walk through and you can be pretty much proud of. And you go through Auckland City now and you see broken people. You see dozens, if not hundreds, of homeless people, lives destroyed.
I actually noticed that personally ever since, I think it was maybe 2008 was the last time that I saw virtually no homeless people in the streets. And it was that was the same year that John Key got elected and the financial crisis happened. And ever since then, all over the place. Massive numbers. Never seen it before.
The financial crisis happened, all right, all by plan, 100% pre-planned, and it's wound up again now to be pulled in again now. And one day the banks are just going to say, oh, creating credit out of thin air is too hard on my wrist today. I've got a sore wrist. They're going to blame the market. They're going to blame the people. They're already doing it to the dairy farmers. There's already been suicides with the dairy farmers. It's a normal cycle of inflate, deflate. Get the debt up, encourage people to get into debt, and then pull it. And then as soon as you start to pull it, put the blame on the customer. The customer who's under stress takes the blame upon themselves. They don't seek help. There's probably not even help there for them that understands what they're going through. Nobody believes that the banks would deliberately sabotage people, and they 100% do. They don't give a damn how many suicides they force. And they know they're forcing suicides. They do it intentionally to force suicides. And I know that for a fact. Right? These are the things that we need to address. And we can't go on saying, what a lovely day, the sun's out, it's all beautiful. Well, these things are happening. Right? Just keep visiting. Someone's walking down the street with a baseball bat bashing people over their head. They're leaving a pile of injuries in the way. Do we do something about it now, or do we wait for the next few elections and perhaps vote on it? The same thing with someone going down the street burning down people's houses. Right? That is what the banks are doing by creating these mortgagee sales. And it's not a matter of people not being able to pay their mortgages. It's a matter of the dirty tactics that happen to those people so that they cease to be able to function. It's deliberate. Absolutely deliberate.
The reason
and
why
these are the things that are going to be bought out. And the mainstream media, taking their advertising money from the banks, won't do it.
Now, it's a predator thing, all right? Now, think about this. You've got a lion and a herd of zebras, right? What does the lion go for? Does he go for the young and the vulnerable, the old and the sick, the ones that can't defend themselves, the ones that can't run as fast, the ones that can't get away? Or do they go for the one that is in the center of the herd, protected by all the others? Or do they go from the one that is on the outskirts and all alone? All right? This is how psychopaths treat people.
I hear what you're saying. It's different with humans because we don't operate to the rules of nature.
Can I finish that? I just need to qualify that because I agree with you. It means that when a psychopath attacks you, trying to go it alone, not the best thing. Asking for help, very good thing to do. Seek the safety of the herd kind of thing. And often if you're sick and you can't defend yourself and that kind of thing, you are easy prey. And that's why it's good to take care of yourself and be strong so that you do not present such an easy target. But of course, those things are very useless pieces of advice after you've already had your throat torn out.
What they do, and Graham McCready, the very good New Zealand personal prosecutor who keeps on getting assassinated or his character assassinated, he summed it up, was when they get someone who's standing up, they do a judicial head kick. And judicial head kick.
Hold on one second.
will
AFR,
involve
could we bring that
false charges.
Can we bring that fade out music back, except for the last 10 seconds? So, you're saying people who put their head up get a big judicial kick with false charges? Is that what you said?
It'll be false charges. It'll be anything they can come up with to put psychological pressure, emotional pressure, financial pressure on that person. And it doesn't matter how strong you are, after a while it will wear you down. Right?
If you're alone, yeah.
Oh, even if you're not alone, it'll wear you down. It'll take out the people around you. When you're getting constant letters from council solicitors.
Oh, we only have a few seconds left, Russell.
Yep, that's the sort of thing that takes you out. That's what I call a judicial head kick. You don't have to have done anything wrong at all. You can be a pillar of society, and they will use that to take you out. They will raid you. The charges will be false. Eventually, you'll be cleared, but it's done its damage.
See you again sometime, folks.
American